You don't notice when you begin to lose yourself because at the beginning, it just feels like love. It feels like devotion. It feels like a real connection. But at some silent point, something inside you begins to disappear without making a sound. And what is most unsettling is that you stay there, even while feeling that something is no longer yours. You begin by giving up small things, an opinion, a desire, a boundary that once felt clear. And then, without realizing it, you no longer know where the other person ends and where you begin. There is a kind of love that does not hold, it absorbs, and the more you try to keep the relationship alive, the further you drift away from yourself. You adjust, you reshape yourself, you silence parts that once were essential, and you call that maturity. But deep down, it is fear, fear of losing, fear of not being enough, fear of not being chosen. And so, you accept less than what you feel. Less than what you deserve, less than what you yourself would offer. You begin to live according to the other person's gaze, the other person's mood, the other person's approval. And without realizing it, your identity begins to depend on it, as if existing on your own were no longer enough. There is a quiet moment when you look inward, and you can no longer find who you used to be. And that is frightening, because it did not happen all at once. It happened gradually. In small concessions, small silences, small renunciations, and when you realize it, you are no longer just in a relationship. You are lost inside it. And perhaps the question you avoid is not about the other person, but about you, who you had to stop being for this to continue, and why. There is a pattern that repeats itself like an emotional echo. You enter a relationship and slowly forget yourself, as if loving were the same as disappearing. You become a reflection, a mirror trying to give back to the other what they want to see. And in that process, you begin to distort your own image, because a mirror has no form of its own. It only reflects, and maybe that is exactly what is happening. You begin to live based on the other person's reaction, on validation, on affection, or even on its absence. There is a silent duality within you. One part wants to be loved, and another part begs to be seen, but not by the other, by yourself. Yet that second part grows more distant because you learn to ignore it, to suppress it, to treat it as if it were an exaggeration. And so the cycle continues. You give too much of yourself, you empty yourself, and then you feel that something is missing, but you don't know what. So you try harder, you give more, you adapt even more, as if the problem were quantity, when in truth it is direction. You are not moving toward the other, you are moving away from yourself. And that creates a strange emptiness, an emptiness that even the presence of the other cannot fill, because it is not a lack of love, it is a lack of identity, and that is why it hurts so deeply, because it is not only about the other leaving, it is about you no longer knowing how to return to yourself. And perhaps the hardest thing to realize is that this pattern does not begin in the relationship, it is simply revealed there, like a mirror that creates nothing, but shows everything. There is something in depth psychology that helps explain this movement, a silent concept, but extremely powerful. Projection. You do not only lose yourself in the other, you find yourself in the other. Or rather, you believe you have found yourself, what was missing within you, what you did not recognize, what you did not integrate, and then you place it onto the other, qualities, strengths, even meaning, and you begin to depend on it. As if without that person, you would lose an essential part of yourself. But the truth is deeper. That part was never in the other. It was always yours. It was simply unconscious. And when something unconscious finds a symbol outside, it becomes intense, almost inevitable. That is why you give yourself so completely, because it feels real, and in a way, it is. But not in the way you imagine. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung, and this does not apply only to irritation, it applies to fascination, to attachment, to emotional dependence. The other becomes a portal, an access point, a living representation of what you have not yet recognized within yourself. And when you try to hold on to the other, you are actually trying to hold on to that inner part. But it cannot be possessed externally, it must be integrated. And that is the breaking point. Because instead of looking inward, you try to control what is outside, and that creates pain, frustration, anxiety, because no relationship can carry the weight of an entire identity. And perhaps the question changes here, no longer about losing the other, but about recovering yourself. What you gave away without noticing, what you projected without knowing, what was always yours, but you forgot. When you begin to see this, something shifts, but not abruptly. It is subtle, almost imperceptible. You begin to observe yourself instead of just reacting. You begin to feel without immediately escaping, and that brings silence. A different kind of silence, not empty, but full of presence. You no longer try to constantly adjust, nor seek approval as before, not because you stopped caring, but because you began to recognize yourself. And in that recognition, there is a kind of return, as if forgotten parts begin to come back, slowly, without urgency, without pressure. You understand that loving does not have to mean disappearing, and that presence does not have to be a constant exchange of validation. There is space between you and the other, and that space is not distance. It is awareness. It is where you breathe. It is where you find yourself, and perhaps for the first time, you realize that you can be in a relationship without abandoning yourself, without losing yourself, without fading away. And that does not guarantee permanence. It does not promise safety, but it brings something deeper, wholeness, a quiet sense of being complete within yourself, even when the other does not respond, even when the other pulls away, because now you no longer depend on that to exist. And deep down, nothing is fully resolved, but something reorganizes, like a sea that still moves, but no longer overflows as before. If this thought touched you, write the word wholeness in the comments, because it is in wholeness that you stop losing yourself in the other and finally begin to find yourself within, and perhaps somewhere quiet inside you. Something has already begun to return.